Well, hello and welcome everyone to Spirit of Truth Church, Spirit of Truth Outreach for this talk on the Passover. I'm so excited. We're going to it's going to be a two-parter. We're going to go through some of the details of the Passover and a little bit of the history this time, and then we're going to get into more of the messianic implications in part two. But I think you guys are going to have a lot of fun. This is a really cool one. So without further ado, again, this is part of the Feasts of Israel. It's part of our Cleaning House, our theology series, and we're talking about the Passover. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right in. Now, to start, the Passover actually has multiple names in Hebrew, and I apologize, I'm probably going to totally mispronounce some of these. I apologize for that. But there's the Hag HaPesach, the Feast of the Passover, and this is again from Exodus 34:25. It emphasizes the Paschal lamb, or the Passover lamb, which is eaten on this occasion. Okay, another name of the Passover is Pesach. Again, this is more referencing the angel of death motif from Exodus 12, where the blood of the lamb was placed over the door frames, and then the angel of death passed over the houses of those Hebrews who had the blood on the doorframe and took the firstborn of the Egyptians. It's also called the Hag HaAviv, the Feast of the Spring Cycle. Again, it's the first feast in the Jewish year calendar. And Zman Chiritano, the time of our emancipation. And this is not biblical per se, but it's again from the Jewish prayers for the holiday, and it emphasizes the result of the first Passover, which was freedom from Egyptian slavery. So again, in Hebrew, you've got a number of different names that the Passover goes by. Now, in terms of the biblical observance, Scripture is going to emphasize two things. First, it's going to emphasize the killing of the lamb. This is obvious from the fact that Passover was designed, again, to literally save the Hebrew children from the angel of death. Again, this distinction is going to be made then between the lamb for Pesach, the family meal, and the lamb for the Pesach sacrifice at the tabernacle. So again, there's two distinct things here. There's the official one, and then there's the lamb at home. Now, the Jewish day is going to begin at sundown. So Sabbath is going to begin at sundown on Friday and is going to end at sundown on Saturday. And again, you still have to observe, again, Sabbath regulations, even throughout the season of the Passover here. So the lamb for the family Paschal meal was to be set aside on the 10th day of the first month and then tested for 4 days to make sure it was without spot and blemish. So essentially they had to pre-select this lamb they were going to use, make sure that there were no defects or errors in it, and then use the lamb. And if the lamb was perfect, if it proved to be good, it was killed by each Jewish family on the first night of Pesach, and not a bone was to be broken. Okay? Then the meal would be eaten, and on the following morning, a special sacrificial lamb would be killed on the altar by the priesthood. So there's sort of two aspects to this. There's what the family does, and there's what the priests do. And the second main biblical observance for Passover is the Pesach meal, or the Seder. And again, this is from Exodus 12:8, which I'll go ahead and read now. And we're going to have a number of readings, both from Scripture as well as from the books here. So just bear with me as I have to hunt for the correct pages on some of these. So we have Exodus 12:8 coming up, which says, "They are to eat the meal that night." This is again instructions for the Passover in Exodus 12. "They should eat it roast over the fire along with unleavened bread and bitter herbs." So there's even the unleavened bread and bitter herbs aspect of this. "Do not eat any of it raw or cooked in boiling water, but only roasted. Its head as well as its legs and organs. Do not let any of it remain until morning. You must burn up any part of it that does not remain." Okay. Again, you are to eat it in a hurry. It is the Lord's Passover. So we see this. The paschal lamb, the unleavened bread, and the bitter herbs all made up this Passover meal. Okay. Now, that's essentially the core of the biblical observance, again from Exodus 12. So what about the rabbinical observance? So essentially, what is this developed into in terms of the Jewish observance of this? Well, the time of Pesach is essentially Nisan, the beginning of months. So that's where it's going to be located each year. And there's a lot of things that happen in Nisan. The world is created then, and again, this is rabbinical things. So this is the legend or tradition. The patriarchs were born and died, they say, in Nisan. Many other events. Jewish people will be redeemed in the final redemption in Nisan. So it really is the sort of the beginning of things. That's kind of how they do it. And with the exception of the day before Pesach, there's no fasting permitted during Nisan. Okay, this is a celebration time. This is the world created time. This is a time for feasting. no fasting. And again, there's even a legend that says the tabernacle was erected on the first day of the month. So, I mean, you get all of these kinds, this whole mythos that sort of builds up around this. Now, in terms of the Pesach lamb, during the Second Temple period, there's a procedure that was followed for killing the lamb. So first, the lamb or he-goat would be selected and brought to the temple compound and then slaughtered in the forecourt of the temple. Now, the lamb was brought by a group. So this is like a group, a family, something of that nature. Okay, it was a unit of some kind. There could be poorer people who couldn't afford it. Maybe they'd be brought in with another group. But it was to be entirely consumed so that none of it remained until morning. And this group, again, consisted of all of the members of any one household, but it could serve many families as well if there were poorer families. So you're getting these groups, and this is everybody. Everybody's got to do this, okay? So they would start at midday on the 14th day of Nisan, and they divided people up into 3 main groups, okay? Each with their little subgroup with their own lamb. And once the first group would enter the temple, the gates would be closed, and the shofar horn, the big horn, would be blown and sounded. And at this point, the Israelites slaughtered the lamb. So the family unit essentially had to slaughter the lamb, and the priests would stand in these long rows, and they would catch the blood from the slaughtered lamb in gold or silver bowls. So the families had to participate in the sacrifice with the priests. It wasn't just the priests doing it. The families had to slaughter it, and then the priests catch the blood. So at that point, essentially, the sacrifice is strung up on a hook, skinned and slit open for the removal of the entrails and gutted and dressed, because again, they're going to eat. The fat is removed the fat is removed from the lamb and put in a vessel, and that's burned on the altar. And then the priests pass the bowls with the blood until the last one, who in one motion splashes the blood on the altar. So all the blood of all of those lambs is splashing the altar. So literally, it's not even just one lamb for the whole nation. It really is, in this case, everybody had to have it, much like in the Passover for a household, a lamb. That was still being followed up until 70 AD. You're going to see Passover has a major shift in Judaism in 70 AD up until modern day, and we're going to get there, don't worry. So at this point, the Levites would chant the Hallel, which is Psalms 113 through 118, and this would be repeated for all 3 major groups. Now afterward, the rest of the animals taken home and roasted with special care so no bone is broken. And after nightfall, every animal is going to be eaten by the company which brought it. Nothing that is not eaten is burned the next day. So anything that's not eaten is burned the next day. So you've also got that kind of at play here, where everything's got to be done with. And the lamb specifically is going to be eaten with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Now, nothing, no dessert or anything, was eaten after the lamb. The lamb's the final piece of the meal. Okay? And this continues, and here's fascinating fact number 1. This continues until 70 AD when the temple's destroyed. Now that makes sense because you can't do the sacrifice anymore. You can't do it. Leaven continues to be removed from the home, and the Pesach meal was eaten with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, but there was no lamb. That part's done. It was no longer possible to offer up a sacrifice. And so it shifts in focus. And I'm going to now read you the new prayer that is now said, because there is no lamb. Israel, say to the Holy One, blessed is he, sovereign of the universe. When the temple stood, we used to offer sacrifices and obtain atonement. Now, however, we can offer naught but prayer. Israel argued, when the temple existed, we used to burn fat and certain portions of the sacrifices, thus obtaining atonement. Now we can only offer our own fat and blood and souls. May it be thy will that these shall be our atonement. So we will render for bullocks the offering of our lips. And so essentially what's happening here is there's no atonement anymore. Once the temple's destroyed, they can no longer offer. And the comment is, well, may these other things substitute. But it was a substitution of necessity, not divine will. God never said, okay, that's a fine substitute. No. It was just, this is what we're going to do from a people's standpoint, given that we no longer have a sacrificial temple. It's a big deal. So there's no more lamb. In the Jewish Passover, there is no lamb. And that's something that even I didn't realize, is that lamb is essentially gone in the Jewish Passover. It's very interesting. So what's happened? Well, over the years, unleavened bread became the key symbol. Essentially, it replaced the lamb in some sense. It looked forward to the returning of the lamb. And what happens is this, is one piece of unleavened bread, and we're going to get more into this later, is called the afikomen. And this is the last morsel, and it's eaten as a reminder of the Pesach lamb. So it's in place of it, so it's a reminder of it. And again, we're going to deal more with that later because that piece gets very interesting. So let's talk now about the leaven. So what's this whole deal with leavened bread? Well, the law, what did it state? So wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye were forbidden during Pesach. The Jewish practice would be to use potato flour and matzah meal from the unleavened bread itself. So essentially, it's unleavened bread. It's nothing that even can leaven is really to be used. So again, potato flour is going to be a big one. And there's going to be rules as well around cleaning utensils obtained from Gentiles. So even the utensils have rules. If you buy your utensils from Gentiles, you have to heat them until white hot in the fire, and then polish it, and then it's rendered pure. All utensils had to undergo a keshering via libun, which is incinerating, hagola, which is purging, iri roshim, which is purging through hot water, and melui, verui, which is soaking. So there were these different ways of purifying even the various utensils. And so most Jewish homes actually have 4 sets of dishes, one for meat and one for dairy. They don't let the two mix. And then also one for Pesach meat and one for Pesach dairy as well. So it's interesting. They have like Passover plates and then standard plates and then split between dairy and meat. Also, and this is another kind of weird thing, or not weird, but just interesting. Leaven that's in a Jewish bakery. So say that you have a Jewish bakery, okay, and they've got all this leaven because obviously you're baking with leaven, okay? What they have to do is they have to sell the shop or all the stuff, something. They've got to sell it all to Gentiles. And then they have to buy it back. And here's the thing with this. It has to be a true legal sale. The Gentiles could literally walk away with it and the Jewish people have nothing to say. But they have to do this because they cannot have any leaven anywhere in any of their homes or places of work or anything. So they sell off the entire thing to Gentiles. Now, typically what they'll do is they'll do this in $1. Like it'll be $1. And there's like an unwritten agreement. You're going to sell this back to me when this is over. But it's a real sale. Like there is nothing fake about this. It's not just for show. This is a real bill of sale to Gentiles to get to do it and then give it back. So it's kind of a funny thing that's how it works out. It's interesting, right? Additionally, there's also a fun ceremony about the cleaning the house of leaven, and we'll get into that too, which is kind of cool. So, what are these ceremonies? So, the B'dikat Chametz is the search for leaven. So, the night before the first night of Pesach, it's the 13th of Nisan, and they go through a final search throughout the house to make sure there's no leaven. And apparently, one of the fun little traditions that's done is that the father of the house will go to 10 corners of the house and hide leaven, and then the kids have to go find it, pick it up with a wooden spoon and a feather, and put it in a napkin and then burn it, essentially. So it's kind of like a little ceremony thing they go through, and it's fun for the kids to go hunt for this stuff. And that's the first ceremony. The second one, Betul Chametz, is the renunciation of leaven. So any remaining leaven is officially renounced and claimed as dust of the earth. Again, undiscovered leaven is nullified. So they say if it's I think the prayer specifically goes, the statement specifically goes, if there's any leaven left, it will be considered as dirt. So in other words, there's no possibility of eating any of this, right? There's no possibility of making it. If it's there, it's dirt. It's there because it's just dirt, okay? And then finally, there's the Biur Chametz, which is the burning of the leaven. And this is a special bonfire. And after that, the home is now ready and worthy to eat the Pesach Seder. So it's kind of cool. They have this neat sort of thing they have to go through beforehand to get rid of the leaven. So what about this unleavened bread? Well, unleavened bread, or matzah, is bread made of that which is capable of becoming leaven but was not. Okay? So again, no leaven in it. And there's 5 types of laws that sort of govern this. It's fast. If you really want to go hardcore with your unleavened bread, like the Orthodox Jews do, you have to follow these rules. So only this type of bread is permitted during Pesach. All adults are required to at least eat 1 piece on the first night. All grains that are capable of fermentation are permissible only for making unleavened bread. You can only use flour and water, not salt. Bread of affliction, because again, this is the bread of affliction and poverty or simplicity. So only water, only flour and water, not salt. It's not to be eaten on the day before Pesach either. Stolen matzah cannot be used to fulfill the commandment of eating unleavened bread, obviously. Matzah ashira, this is the rich matzah. It's got like the honey in it. Can be used for the old and the sick, and all other days of the Pesach. So actually there's a very bland, kind of dry, again, the bread of simplicity, and then there's a rich matzah as well. And again, the old and the sick can use the rich matzah if they need to for, pain and digestive reasons. I mean, obviously, again, the point is not to torture yourself. The point is to experience what was being experienced. Okay. There's also a guarded matzah process as well for the Orthodox Jews, and they go really intense with it, using cold water, special cooking techniques, all this stuff like you having to basically score the matzah so that it doesn't leaven, all this kind of interesting stuff. So they have a special way for the Orthodox Jews to do the unleavened bread. So what about the Seder itself, or the ceremony here? So on the first night of Passover, happens to the first night of Passover, and Seder simply means the order. Okay, and the purpose is what? To pass on the account, or to relate the historical facts of Pesach, of Passover, and to affirm the hope of a future redemption. And this is really important. The purpose of Passover, even for the Jewish person, is a future redemption. Okay, that's key. So this starts after nightfall with the opening lines of a book called the Haggadah, or the Telling. And this is essentially the book that is the statements that you're going to read and say throughout Passover. It's kind of the official Passover book, the Haggadah. And so what are the rabbinic laws around Passover? Well, the Seder can't start too early because, again, the chanting of the first lines has to happen after nightfall. And what they typically say is that you have to have 3 stars visible in the sky, then you can start. And then the Seder must also not begin too late, because children have to be able to stay awake. Because again, the kids have a part to this, and it's important that they are taught these things. So the kids have to be part of it. Okay, and then the last piece of unleavened bread, the afikomen, must be eaten by midnight. That's another rule. And this has to be conducted by the leader or master of a group. So the oldest male, if it's a householder, or a rabbi, ideally. And you've got to wear a special garment, a white robe known as a kittel, which symbolizes purity, joy, happiness, and priesthood. And again, the function of the priest is to teach Israel. So that's why even the oldest male of the household is to teach Israel. I mean, that's the function here. And so the Levite tribe maintains the text and teaches the content of Scripture. But then again, this can be disseminated through the Passover service, even within homes. Additionally, Passover is not to take place on Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. Now, what is the order of the Passover Seder? So first, you have the sanctification of the occasion. It's a special prayer, the Kiddush. Benediction is said over the first of the 4 cups of wine. So you have your first cup of wine right off the bat, right out of the gate. People drink the first cup. And yes, it is absolutely wine. It's not anything else. It's definitely wine. And we'll get into that as well. Second step, washing of hands. This is going to remove ritual impurity. But again, there's no temple, so it's kind of just a reminder, right, that you're approaching God in some sense, right, approaching God in purity. Okay. Third, you have the eating of the greens. This is any green vegetable. It could be celery, lettuce, or radish tops. Many people use parsley, which symbolizes the hyssop used to apply the blood to the lintels in Egypt, the door frames. Again, it's dipped into salt water and eaten. Again, God saved via the salt waters of the Red Sea, so that's kind of a cool thing there. And the kids then get to start asking the right questions. And so we'll talk about those questions later, where we're actually going to go through them. But that would happen here as well. Fourth, you're going to have the breaking of the middle matzah. So on the Seder table, there's this cloth bag called the matzah tash with 3 compartments. And 1 piece of matzah will have been placed into each of the 3 compartments. And the middle loaf is, at this point, taken out of the bag, broken into 2 parts. The larger piece is hidden away to become part of the afikomen ceremony at the end of the Seder. The smaller piece is returned to its place in the center of the matzah tash with the words, "Lo, this is the bread of affliction." Okay, so again, bread in the middle is broken. Interesting. So then they tell the story. So then they're going to read the Haggadah, which is the order of the Seder and the storyline of Exodus. And what is this? Well, it's a collection of praise songs. Again, Psalms 113 through 118. And I'm going to also read these steps here as well in terms of telling the story. So give me 1 second. I'm going to get to page 50. Okay. Here we go, the telling of the story. All right, so what is the telling of the story? So it starts with the Ha Lachma Anya, or the bread of affliction, which goes like this. This is the bread of affliction, which our ancestors ate in Egypt. All who are hungry, let them come and eat. All who are needy, let them come and celebrate Passover. Now we are here. Next year in the land of Israel. Now we are enslaved. Next year we will be free. Then we have the Ma Nishtana, or the 4 questions, and these are fun. So what they say is this, they say, why is this night different than all other nights? And the answer is, the questions then are as follows. On all other nights, the Jewish people eat leavened or unleavened bread. Why on this night do they only eat matzah? On all other nights, the Jews eat all kinds of vegetables. Why on this night do they eat bitter herbs? On all other nights, they do not dip the vegetables even once. Why do they dip twice? And on all other nights, the Jewish people eat either sitting up or reclining. Why on this night do they eat reclining? And the questions are answered with what is known as the Avadim Hainu. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. And that is the reason why, is because this is essentially reminding them of their slavery in Egypt. The 4th one, Again, the fourth, let's see what we've got here. The fourth unit. It happened that Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Eleazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon were reclining at a seder in Bnei Barak. They were discussing the exodus from Egypt all that night until their students came and told them, "Our masters, the time has come for reciting the morning Shema." Rabbi Eleazar ben Azariah said, "I am like a man of 70 years old, yet I did not succeed in proving that the exodus from Egypt must be mentioned at night until Ben Zorna explained it. It is said that you may remember the day you left Egypt all the days of your life. Now, the days of your life refer to the days." An additional word, all indicates the inclusion of the nights. The sages, however, said the days of your life refers to the present day world, and all indicates the inclusion of the days of Mashiach. Okay, so interesting. All right, 5, let's see, what are some other ones in here? Formally telling of Exodus, deals deeper roots. Now, here's some other comments from this reading. It is possible from the first of the month, the biblical text therefore states in that day, but in that day could also mean while it's daylight. The biblical text therefore states it is because of. This phrase is not said except during the time when matzah and bitter herbs are placed before you. And then on the 8th night, deeper roots of Exodus. In the beginning, our ancestors were idol worshippers, but now the all-present one has brought us close to his worship. As the verse states, Yehoshua said to all the people, "This is what God, the God of Israel, said. Your ancestors used to live across the river Terach, Avram's father and Nahor's father, and they served foreign gods." All right, so we've got a lot of different, very interesting statements here. So those are just some of the statements from the Haggadah, the telling of the story. 6th step, you have the washing of the hands, and then 7, the blessing of the bread. So there's a special blessing for the bringing forth of bread from the earth, and the meal begins with this course, and it's recited over the unleavened bread. Then you have the blessing over the matzah. So the benediction is followed by the eating of the smaller piece of the middle matzah that had been broken earlier, as well as the upper matzah. Okay. Then you have the blessing over bitter herbs. The horseradish root is dipped into a mixture known as charoset, a sweet, dark-colored paste made of fruits and nuts, which is eaten. It brings tears to the eyes of the Pesach guests. And then finally, the eating of the matzah and the bitter herbs, step 10. 2 small pieces of unleavened bread are broken from the bottom loaf of the matzah and the matzah-tash. Maror and charoset are placed between this, and a sandwich is eaten, which is kind of cool, in memory of the destruction of the temple. Then you have the dinner. So, the ordered table. No lamb is eaten in the Jewish Passover anymore. It is roast chicken or some other kind of kosher meat. No lamb. There's no sacrifice. Jewish believers do eat lamb. They stay with God's original covenant, but not here. Okay. Oh, sorry. Jewish believers do eat lamb. Sorry, what I said. Jewish believers do eat lamb because they stay with God's original commandment, and it's in celebration of the Messiah, which we will see when we get there. But Jews do not. Messianic Jews do, or Jewish believers. This is eaten between the 2nd and 3rd cups of wine in a joyous atmosphere with the singing of songs. It begins with the dipping of a roasted egg into salt water. It represents the sacrifice that was offered in the temple on the first morning of Pesach. The symbol of mourning over the destruction of the temple when the Pesach sacrifice ceased. So it's an egg in place of the lamb, makes it a sign of mourning. Now, a person must not drink to excess during this meal, no intoxication. Why? So you don't fall asleep. Then we have step 12, the eating of the afikomen. This is the hidden. The afikomen is the hidden. Everyone eats a piece the size of an olive, essentially. And finally, we have, next, 13, we have the reciting of grace. So the 3rd cup of wine at the end of the meal is the symbol of redemption and the freedom, and it is called the cup of redemption, and it symbolizes the blood of the animal that saved the Jews from the last plague. Now, this is very important because the communion, Christian communion, is the 3rd cup of the Passover. That's what it is. Okay. Now, you cannot drink anything between the 3rd and 4th cups to avoid intoxication, and this is followed by a special recitation that begins with the words, "Pour out your wrath." Step 14, we have the reciting of the Psalms. The Hallel the remainder is sung in Psalm 136, which is based on Isaiah 30:29 is also. And the singing is done over the 4th cup of wine, and only water then is allowed after that. And finally, you have a closing, where you have an acceptance, and then God has found the actions performed acceptable. And there's a hymn recitation, and then finally, the ending. So that's the whole Passover service. I didn't mention the 2nd cup. We'll get to that, the cup of plagues. We'll talk about that one as well a little bit later. But fascinating stuff. So let's jump into some more of these details. We have the 3 matzah. The flour, again, must be unleavened. The dough must be striped to make it more brittle. It also has to be pierced in order to impede the leavening process. So striped and pierced to make it unleavened. Interesting. Keep this all in mind, right? The interior of the matzah tash must have 3 pockets, and the matzah are separated by compartments. During the ceremony, the 3 matzah become 4. The larger piece is eaten in conjunction with the 3rd cup of wine, and there's a large messianic significance to this later. We're not going to get into it tonight. That's going to be next in 2 weeks. The last thing to be eaten was the lamb. So this afikomen replaces or represents the lamb, and the taste must last. It should be the last thing eaten. Now, in terms of the 4 cups, this is fermented red wine. That's always what's used. There's the cup of blessing, the cup of plagues, the cup of redemption, and the cup of praise. So also there's an interesting custom of reclining. You're going to see that in often the instructions there's recline at this time. You recline to the left. This is obligatory. In the drinking of the 4 cups, you must be reclined. The eating of the first piece of matzah, you must be reclined. The eating of the korech, you must be reclined. The eating of the afikomen, you must be reclined. And this is, again, demonstrating being able to eat in the sense of while they were slaves, they'd eat stood up, but they can now recline, they are free. They also would read Song of Solomon, 112, and those who ate free, again, could recline. Those who were slaves had to eat standing up or sitting, so the left is, again, to avoid discomfort. Saltwater. Saltwater is said to represent the tears the Israelites shed in the land of Egypt. Now, the Seder plate. So this dates actually to 600 AD. There's 6 indentations for each of the food items. The charoset is chopped apples, nuts, honey, cinnamon, wine, with the apples being a big part of it. You can also use figs, dates, pomegranates, or raisins. And again, the primary ingredient's always apples. And because it was said the Jews gave birth to children under apple trees, interestingly enough. And the red wine is the spilled blood of the Jews. So finely chopped, this all would be finely chopped and mixed together and left to turn a deep brown, like the brick and mortar of the enslavement under the Egyptians. Again, lamb is no longer served, but you have these separate plates on there. There's separate pockets, compartments. The Haggadah. So let's talk about the Haggadah introduction. So it's a telling or narration, and the text will be recited on the Seder on the first night of Passover, and you're going to get the Exodus story. And this is based on Exodus 13:8. So if we flip to Exodus 13:8. On that day, explain to your son, this is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. Let it serve as a sign for you on your hand and as a reminder on your forehead. So the Lord's instruction might be in your mouth, for the Lord brought you out of Egypt with a strong hand. So again, there's this instruction to do this. There are 4 commands actually in Scripture to repeat the story of the Exodus to the Jewish people. And this was developed over about 1,000 years, from the Maccabean period all the way up to the 8th century AD. It includes scriptures, teachings from rabbis. Again, there are sections of Scripture. There's sections of the Mishnah, which is the oral law, sections of the Midrash, which is the rabbinic explanation of Scripture. There are legends, prayers, blessings. There's a ton of stuff that all kind of goes into this. And the main point is, again, to narrate the historical facts of the Exodus. 4 is also a common theme. There are 9 total sections, but everything's like in sets of 4. You'll notice the 4 cups, things like that. The Kiddush, or the sanctification, the prayer of sanctification that was recited over the first cup of wine during the Kadesh ceremony. You also have the invitations found in here, which is written in Aramaic. It's a call for all who are hungry to come and partake of the Passover. Another interesting messianic implication. And also, in the invitation, you're supposed to open your door and let any strangers in. So, it's interesting. You can bring everybody in, which is interesting, because you don't want to make sure there's any Jewish people who can't celebrate Passover, so you got to invite the strangers in. So the 4 questions, we sort of read them. What's fascinating is, why is this night different from all other nights? We talked about those. But here's the fascinating thing. Before 70 AD, the 4th question read, on all other nights we can eat any kind of lamb in any way, any kind of meat in any way. But on this night is the paschal lamb that is roasted. Why is that? Now, after 70 AD, it's on all other nights we can eat either sitting or reclining. But on this night, all recline. Why is that? So you see how they've removed the lamb, because the sacrificial system is gone. Okay. Now, the 4 sons. So there's also another interesting story of the 4 sons. There's this legend of the 4 sons based upon the 4 commands in the Mosaic Law for fathers to recount the story of Exodus to their sons. There's the wise son, the wicked son, the simple son, and then the one who doesn't know how to ask a question. And so I'll go ahead and read to you. It's kind of a fun little thing here on the 4 sons. By a fitting answer to the questions of each of the 4 types of the sons of Israel, does the Torah explain the meaning of this night's celebration. The wise son, eager to learn, asks earnestly, what mean the testimonies and statutes and the ordinances which the Lord our God hath commanded us? To him thou shalt say, the service is held in order to worship the Lord our God, that it may be well with us all the days of our life. The wicked son inquires in a mocking spirit, what mean ye by this service? As he says, ye, not we, he excludes himself from the household of Israel. Therefore, thou shouldst turn on him and say, it is because of that which the Lord did for me when I came forth out of Egypt. For me and not for him. For had he been there, he would not have been found worthy of being redeemed. The simple son indifferently asks, "What is this?" To him thou shalt say, "By the strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." And for the son who is unable to inquire, thou shalt explain the whole story of the Passover, as it is said, "And thou shalt tell thy son in that day, saying, It is because of that which the Lord did for me when I came forth out of Egypt." So, pretty cool. Then you have the Magid, the telling of the Exodus. It's the main part. And during this, you have the plagues, actually. And the 10 drops are spilled from the cup of plagues for each of the 10 plagues. And then it's drunk and not refilled. And again, this is because the Jews are not supposed to rejoice over the misfortune of others. So that's the second cup is interesting. You have to drop one for each of the 10 plagues. Fascinating stuff. You then have the Afikomen, and the Afikomen is recovered and eaten, and the cup of redemption is drunk. So, I mean, literally, you're talking about communion at that point. I mean, this is really what it is, okay? But again, this was not done in Jesus' time, and the reason why it wasn't done like this is simply because the Afikomen, the temple is still standing at that point. And then you have the door open for Elijah, and Elijah's cup is filled. Often people will have a chair for Elijah or a seat for Elijah because they say Elijah has not returned. Again, messianic indication because Jesus actually says Elijah's already come. So it's really interesting, some of these things in the parallels, but we're going to dive more into that later. Then the fourth cup is filled, and I'll do another reading for you as the fourth cup is filled on page 64. Pour out your fury on the nations that do not know you, upon the kingdoms that do not invoke your name. For they have devoured Jacob and desolated his home. Pour out your wrath on them. May your blazing anger overtake them. Oh, pursue them in wrath and destroy them from under the heavens of the Lord. So it's interesting, in terms of how the wrath is even in Passover as well. Because again, Egypt was judged during the Passover. Finally, you'll do the hymns of praise, the Hallel, again, Psalms 115 through 118, Psalm 136. A special song called the Nishmat. And it's interesting. There's a medieval legend that claims the Nishmat was written by Peter the disciple, who actually remained faithful to Judaism in his heart. So there's even like a polemic or an argument against Peter, like, oh, Peter never became a real Christian. He was always a Jew. And so that's kind of in here as well, which is fascinating. And then you have the Nitzah, or the Nirtzah, which is the acceptance. I'll go ahead and read that on page 66. The order of Pesach is now accomplished as prescribed according to all its formalities and customs, as we have or had the privilege to arrange it. Oh, may we also merit the actual observance thereof. O pure dweller on high, raise up your people, of whom it was said, who can number them? O hasten to lead the shoots of your plant, Israel, to bring the redeemed to Zion with joyful song. And that's the end. And so that's the Passover. So that's essentially what you do and how you do it in the different readings. And then there's other practices. So there's readings from Exodus, Numbers, Joshua. Some have the Song of Solomon, the Song of the Sea from Exodus 15. A number of different types of things that can be included in the Passover. And that's where we're going to stop today. So next time, I'll go ahead and tell you where we're going. That was just essentially the walkthrough of the Passover is essentially what we covered today. And on the next time we meet in 2 weeks, for this, we're going to talk about the Messiah's observance, Hebrew Scriptures, the Messiah's observance of the Pesach. So that's going to be fun. The Messianic implications of the Pesach in Isaiah, Yeshua as the Passover Lamb, and the believer's responsibility, and the last Pesach and the first Lord's Supper. So we're going to get into the requirements therein, unleavened bread, wine, and remembrance. A lot of cool stuff, but we're going to get a lot of the New Testament Messianic implications next time. So if there is anybody who would like to jump on and have a conversation about this, talk more about the Passover, ask more questions, I'm going to open a Zoom call now. I'll go ahead and post that in there if you do want to join. I will go ahead and link this in, and you can come in and we can have a conversation if you'd like. So let me go ahead and do my invite here, copy invite link. All right, we're going to go ahead and do this, and I'll post it right in here. So if you would like to join us, feel free. Go ahead and click on that link. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and sign off now. So thank you so much for joining us here at Spirit of Truth Church, Spirit of Truth Outreach, for this talk from the Cleaning House series on the Feast of Israel, the Feast of Passover Part 1. Very excited, looking forward to doing the Messianic implications with you in 2 weeks. I hope you have a wonderful night, and hopefully we'll see some of you in Zoom.